Hello my lovelies, today I'm going to be talking you through the books I finished in October. October was a really good reading month for me. I finished 5 books and none of them were university books. However, I did end up DNFing one book, so I'll go through that one first. And that book is Empire of the Sun by J.G. Ballard. I was hoping to read this to be useful for my dissertation. It was not. It is autobiographical fiction and based off Ballard's own childhood during wartime Shanghai. As somebody who's incredibly interested in war history, I thought this book was going to be brilliant. I had really high expectations for it. However, I found it really boring. Part 1 involved just a lot of walking around and I did not like Ballard's writing style. I have read his short story Terminal Beach, which was suggested to me for my atomic bomb dissertation. And I really didn't like the writing style in that. I don't think he has much of a flow in terms of the writing style that I like to read. And it just was so incredibly boring. Nothing at all seemed to be happening in this book. I got halfway through it and then decided I was just going to skip to the part where you could see the atomic bombs, because apparently you were able to see the flash of the atomic bomb from Shanghai. And it was just so non-poetic that I can't use it. So after skimming to that point in the book, I decided to DNF it, very sadly. Another book that I was reading for my dissertation, and it turned out not to have anything I could use in it, but it ended up being such a fantastic book that I really enjoyed reading it for myself anyway, and that is Kazuo Ishiguro's A Pale View of Hills. This is the second Ishiguro book that I have read intending to use it for my dissertation, and it is also the second time that it has nothing about the atomic bombs in it, despite it being within that area and that time period. And it's also the second time that I'm not mad at all that it had nothing in it. It is about a woman, Etsuko, who is living in England and trying to deal with the suicide of her daughter, and through dealing with this she is flashing back to a woman she met in the rebuilding of Nagasaki called Sachiko, but the memories take a disturbing twist. I just love the way in which Ishiguro writes, and it definitely feels very Japanese in its style, and it definitely did take on a disturbing twist. It had a really great creepy feeling, and I was getting really into this disturbing, uneasy vibe it was giving out, and I just felt really engaged in the disturbing, creepy way the plot took form. I think Ishiguro is definitely becoming one of my favourite authors, and I do want to try and read through more of his work. I did originally give this book 4 stars because I wanted to know more about the children in the book, but reading reviews of it afterwards just opened me up to all these different conspiracy theories about the ending of the book, which I loved. And then that led me to reading an interview with Kazuo Ishiguro on JSTAR using my university login, and that completely blew my mind. It changed the way I saw the book. It made me see things in the beginning that I didn't pick up at the start. It made me realise afterwards that yes, these things I read at the beginning make so much more sense now that I've come across this theory. It also makes me realise I'm not a very attentive reader, which is a bit bad for me being a literature student. So I really want to change this to 5 stars because of how clever it is when you think of it in terms of this theory. But I think I'll save that for a reread because I definitely want to reread it to spot all the different foreshadowings for it. At the moment I'm going to stick with my original 4-star review, but I do think this man is a genius and I do want to reread it, and I do think I'll give it 5 stars in a reread. The next book I finished in October was Tower of Dawn by Sarah J Maas, which is the 6th book in the Throne of Glass series if you don't count the Assassin's Blade as book 1. It's a hard one to explain because we are so deep into the series, but it basically follows Shoal's story during the events of Empire of Storms because he isn't within the action of that book at that point. I just love that this is a story that's going on at the same time and in the same timeline as the book before, and I'm really glad that we got to know what's happening with Shoal. And it also did involve revelations that do propel the story forward, so I do recommend reading it because I know a couple of people skipped Tower of Dawn in the series thinking that, oh, it's Shoal, it's not so interesting. I loved it. You can tell how much I loved it and how engaged I was in this book because the W from Tower of Dawn and the little hand sign has been rubbed off from me gripping the book so hard, which has happened with quite a few of my Throne of Glass series books. I cannot explain how much I love this series and the depth of the world. There's so much that this book is expanding on from the already so deep world that we have. This brings more and more details together, and I honestly think Sarah J Maas could write somebody doing their laundry and I'd be so engaged with it because I just love the way she writes. It just feels perfect. I also like that it's a bit of a slow burn romance in this, and we get to find out more about characters that we didn't in the other books. We get introduced to new characters. I just love this book, and I can't find the words to articulate a review for it because of how far into the series it is and how absolutely everything at this point is a spoiler, and all the things I love in it are just spoilers for different things, but perfection. I did bring Kingdom of Ash, the finale book, with me. It's 980 pages. I have got the art edition from Waterstones as well. But I don't want to rush into reading it because I want to savour the ending of this story so bad. So I'm going to leave it either for my reading week at the very end of term or Christmas holidays. The next book I read for myself has been on my TBR list for a very, very long time, and that is book 1 of the His Dark Materials trilogy by Phillip Pullman, called The Northern Lights. It is set in this steampunk world in the equivalent of a pre-war period, and everybody has a demon, or as I've been reading it, daemon because of the way it's spelled. And your demon is your soul manifested in the form of an animal. It follows a young girl called Lyra who has been brought up in Jordan College, Oxford, and it turns out she is part of this bigger destiny, all to do with dust and all to do with other new worlds, but she can't know about it and just thinks she's been caught up in this conspiracy and this great adventure to the north. The chapters are quite long, at about 20 pages each, so it did take me a while to really get into this book, but I did find myself wanting to binge it the later on I got with it. The thing that got me really engrossed in this book is all the details and all the lore behind how demons work in the scientific world and all the world building setup of it. Another thing that I loved about this book is the fact that even though it's a children's book, it did get quite disturbing towards the end if you really thought about the action points that are happening in it. Which is why I was a little surprised about the BBC adaptation that's now showing in November, which is the reason why I picked up this book, because I want to try and stay ahead of the series. But that's showing at 8 o'clock. I would have put this at a 9 o'clock showing, not an 8 o'clock showing, because of the disturbing thing that does happen towards the end, but maybe children wouldn't think about that so much and not find it disturbing, because you do have to put the philosophical thought into it. So when you really think about it, it's a bit creepy, but maybe on the surface level children won't take it that way. The reason why I've given this book 4 stars and not 5 stars is because the pacing just felt really off. I don't know what it was about it, but I didn't like the pacing. It just felt like some things were rushed into, or different plot twists didn't feel much like a twist. They just felt, oh, here it is, because there wasn't any build up to it. So I think that's why it will work well as a TV adaptation, because that weird pacing can be smoothed over across the length of the series. It's just so much world building, not much building up to the plot twists, and it lost their impact of them by doing it that way. But I still really want to read the next 2 books, and I'm enjoying the BBC adaptation as well. The next physical book that I read was Shirley Jackson's The Lottery and Other Stories, and that was the Feeling My Shelf Book of the Month for October, which I've done a reading vlog for, and I'll link that down to the description, as well as Zara's Feeling My Shelf Instagram book club. This is a really hard one to rate and review because I can't explain why I like the stories. It's more of the vibe and the comforting feeling I got from reading these. On the back of the book it says, the creepy unease of life squandered and the unspoken tales of everyday suburban life are captured with brilliant clarity and sly humour in these tales by a master of the short story form, which I think really does describe the stories really well. I definitely saw the unnerving side of these stories about the mundane and the everyday. However, I found Jackson's writing style to be incredibly comforting in some way, in the way that the flow she has. So it's really hard to put a number on this, because while I liked the stories and I really liked their feel, there was nothing in them that I could pinpoint particularly to higher up their stars. There's no character points or plot points I can say, yes, this is why I've rated it up. But similarly, there's hardly anything I can criticise about it. There's no plot points or characters to bring it down. Maybe the short story Elizabeth being 40 pages dragged a little bit, but that's literally the only thing I can think. The best term I've heard used to describe these stories, and that was by Zara, who hosts the Feeling My Shelf book club, and that is cozy creepy, and that is definitely how I felt about these. And I did really like the title story, The Lottery, and the fact that it was put at the end, because that was the most impactful way to do it, because after all these uneasy lives with the everyday mundane, to have a really shocking story at the end worked so well. So I've given The Lottery and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson 3.5 to 4 stars, because I just really enjoyed my time reading them. And the last book is a cult classic, and that is The Handmaid's Tale by Margret Atwood, but I didn't read it as this book, I actually read it as the audible version. We're getting a little bit glowy over here. This is narrated by Elizabeth Moss, who actually plays Offred in the TV show, and I did watch that before I read the book, so it just felt incredibly immersive because now I connect Elizabeth Moss with Offred. So from this perspective as somebody who knew the show first, it felt like the most immersive way I could have heard it out loud, because it felt like Offred had come to life and was telling me the story. And she was just really good at the way she was pacing it, and when she did dramatic pauses and when she lowered her voice and raised her voice, and the places where she sped up and slowed down, which made it 11.5 hours as an audiobook, which is quite a long time for, I think it's a 300-page book. It's probably a lot quicker to read the book than to listen to it that way, but it was one of the best experiences of an audiobook I've had so far, and I don't think there are going to be many other things that are going to be able to beat that. It was just a phenomenal reading experience. I was hooked all the way through despite already knowing what was going to happen because of the show. And the one thing I wasn't expecting was the historical notes at the end, which are read by different people. I think one of them who played Joseph, Commander Joseph in the 3rd series. And it was set up as a conference talking about the history of Gilead after the fact. And it was the most meta thing I have ever listened to, because it was talking about The Handmaid's Tale as a manuscript, whether she's a reliable narrator. It's talking about different tapes that are found, the history of Gilead, the people's names that she's changed, who they actually were, whether they really existed, how handmaids dealt with being let out. So it's just talking about Gilead and the events of The Handmaid's Tale as a historical point in time. And I thought that was just so incredibly clever, and it took me by surprise because I wasn't expecting it to be there, because Audible only labels things in terms of chapters. It didn't have a chapter called historical notes, it was just the next chapter. Just added a whole extra layer to the storyline, which I'm excited to be explored in the Testament. So I think I'm going to use one of my next Audible credits to buy the Testaments. So those were the 5 books I read and the 1 book that I DNF'd during October. November has been another really great reading month for me so far. I've got 2 current reads on the go. I love them both so much, and one of those is the Feeling My Shelf Book Club Book of the Month for November, and it's so good. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.